On today's video, we'll tell you what secondaries are best for the Black Templars. Again, thanks GW. All right, guys, so we are back with another secondaries video. GW was nice enough to go ahead and update the chapter approved Grand Tournament pack right after we dropped our secondaries video. So now a good chunk of those are out of date. So we are here to update you on the new revised secondaries and talk about how they changed and whether they're now worth taking or maybe not worth taking, depending on what happened with them. So, we're not going to cover any of the ones that we already covered that did not change in the previous book. This includes all of the mission secondaries, are all exactly the same. All the missions themselves are actually exactly the same. The only thing that they have changed is they added a little paragraph at the bottom of each one, just letting you know the FAQ change that they did for second turn, how you score at the end of your fifth turn instead of command phase. So, to start it off, we're going to start it off with Battlefield Supremacy again. Engage on all fronts did not change, so we're not going to cover that one. You can check that out in our previous video. Behind enemy lines, this one did change. It is now giving you partial credit. It used to be that you had to have two units wholly within your enemy's deployment zone in order to score 4 points. You can now just have one wholly within your enemy's deployment zone to score 2 points, or two to score 4, like before. So this one is a little easier to score if you only have one unit there. For me personally, I think I'm still going to leave this one at home in favor of engage on all fronts, just because you have to be wholly within their deployment zone. And, engage on all fronts is just significantly easier to score and score more points overall throughout the game's duration.
Yeah, I agree with that. Engage is definitely better overall. It does have some niche uses if you are taking a full scale teleport or drop pod style army, where you're going to be bringing in deep strike, so you can consistently have those units in your enemy's deployment zone. It has some uses there where you can get some points consistently. You get 6 to 8, maybe 10 points doing it that way. Multiple, but for consistency, engaging on front is probably the better option here. So that moves on to our new secondary, Stranglehold here. It replaces Domination. So this one is going to give you 3 victory points if you control 3 or more objectives instead of having to do more than half. So this gives it a little bit more easy to accomplish, especially if you're on missions that required 6 objectives. It made it very difficult to actually get. Now that forced you to have 4 of the 6 objectives, which was kind of a win more. If you have 4 of the 6 objectives, you're probably winning the battle anyway, and it kind of was not really of a needed option for you. This makes it a little bit easier for all armies to score, only having to require you to have 3 or more on 6 objectives, so easier to accomplish. On the 4 objective missions, that is also going to be 75% of those objectives, but still manageable. But even with that, I think Engage is still a better option for us. As an elite army and Space Marines, it's very difficult to spread all the way across the board to maintain coverage and the amount of objectives that's needed to actually score this. So it's easier to get table quarters than to maintain potentially 3 objectives or more on your opponent. You still want to make sure that you get your objectives, obviously, and this could potentially synergize well with that. Just easier to get quarters in general.
Yeah, I largely agree with that. I think this is I'm very happy with the change on this. I think it's much easier to accomplish now. Before it was just a straight up no. It's never going to be something that you're going to want to take. I think now you could consider it. You might want to. I think the times that you might want to consider it would be there's a couple missions with a center objective, and which pairs very well with Oaths of Moment. But those sort of are counterintuitive to engage on all fronts fronts, which you have to be more than 6 inches away from the center. So in those missions, I could see taking this over engage, simply because, we want to control more objectives than our opponent. Usually that means controlling 3 and holding them to 2 or 1. So you're going to be able to get this if you're maxing out those primaries anyway, which is nice. And I think, largely engage is going to still be easier to score and a better overall objective. But in those center objective missions, especially if you're planning to take Oaths of Moment, this would be worth considering, because you don't have to worry about being more than 6 inches away, to score a table quarter. So that brings us to the next category, which is No Mercy, No Respite. The old Thin Their Ranks is now No Prisoners, and this one has also received a pretty significant change. It went from being the number of models that you kill to the number of wounds that you kill. So previously, if you killed 10 models, you got 1 point. Now, if you kill 10 Space Marines who have 2 wounds apiece, you're getting 2 points. So definitely an improvement to it. Is it going to be something that we're going to take? Probably not, to be honest. Monsters, vehicles, and characters are now completely excluded from this. Whereas before they were not. So that's sort of, 1 step forward, 2 steps back kind of thing. For me, even if you're running into more elite armies with more wounds, Space Marines, Custodes, etc., you're still going to have to kill a substantial amount of things to get 10 points out of it, which is sort of our baseline. Can I score 10 points from this? So for me, this is still not quite good enough to warrant over other secondaries.
Yeah, I agree. It's a large improvement over what it used to be. You do have to be very careful with your own army construction about giving up too many wounds potentially on this. We are elite, we are taking storm shields, we are giving ourselves some durability, so we should mitigate some of that a little bit. But if you're taking armies like the Black Tide or trying to pull that off, this is a big deterrent for that, because you're going to give up max points typically using the Black Tide units, which is the Crusader squads and your intercessors, which don't have invulnerable saves standard without the Aurelian Shrouds. So they're going to be easy to kill, and you'll be giving up a lot of points. So that's just something to think about. All right, so the next one we have is going to be To the Last, which is replacing While We Stand, We Fight. So it basically is the same as it was before, the errated version of While We Stand, We Fight that came out in the facts recently. There is some exceptions to this, though. What it now does is if you split your unit into multiples, you potentially can lose points on it. So previously, if you combat squatted, for example, a unit of intercessors into 5 units each, if your opponent selected this and killed one of those units, they get partial points, where they did not previously. So instead of the 3 points, the 5 points that you would get if they didn't kill both of those combat squads, if you lose one of those portions, you get 3. So it's a nice change. It balances out a little bit, and it also prevents your opponent from basically guaranteeing themselves the 15 points on this by being able to kill some of those portions of those combat squads. So it's a good change, in my opinion. It's still a useful tactic for some of our units. It's pretty decent if you don't feel like your opponent can actually do enough damage to you. If you're taking a big Terminator squad, or maybe your Vanguard Veteran squad, if you plan to play a little bit not as aggressive with your list, it's still useful and can get you a decent amount of points, but you just have to be careful because they're going to draw a lot of attention for us. We are still elite, and they will get shots put into them, but it is an option for you to take if you so choose.
Yeah, this is obviously a bit of a nerf to this one, which is fine. Personally, for me, I think very rarely would we choose this one, simply because most of our really durable units are the ones that are also going to be in the most harm's way, because they can absorb a lot of damage, but they're also our damage dealing units. Other armies, this is a better suited secondary for them. But for us as Black Templars, I think there are other better options for us than trying to keep a unit alive. It may force you to play more conservatively than you really should be, which may lose you primary points, which is not something that we want to do, obviously. So moving on, that brings us to shadow operations. Raise the banners did not change. It is exactly the same. However, investigate sites is now investigate signal. So previously this was a secondary that you performed an action wholly within the 6 inches of the center of the board, and it was complete at the end of your turn, which was nice. But you couldn't have any enemy units within 6 inches at all. So it made it really hard to achieve. They have changed that now. So now you can start to perform this action in your movement phase, at the end of your movement phase. Same conditionals as long as you're wholly within 6 inches, blah, blah, blah. However, you have the opportunity to try and kill any units that your opponents may have wholly within the 6 inches of the center of the board by the end of your turn to still achieve this action. So that's great, because now you can start to perform the action and you have your whole turn of shooting and fighting to try and kill off that unit. They also changed the wording for the enemy. It used to be just within, so you could have one dude who is just above across the border into the center of the 6 inches, and it would prevent you from scoring this. Now the enemy also has to be wholly within 6 inches, so which makes it more difficult for them to interrupt you. So I think this definitely puts it back into our hands a little bit. We talked about this in the last video. You don't want to take secondaries that rely on your opponent doing or not doing something. You want to take secondaries that you can achieve either on your own or are dependent on your own actions or your own decisions that you make. So this one gives a lot more of that control back to us. So I think this one may actually be worth taking now.
Yeah, I agree. This synergizes really well with the open moments and taking that center. It is something that requires an action to be used, so you just have to make sure that you are not parking a shooting unit on that, unless you're using the stratagem to get that shooting back. But it is, in general, a much better improvement. That wholly within, getting your opponent all the way in to cancel that is pretty huge, especially if you have a larger squad that's 6 inches, you can block them out. Even if they charge into you, they still have to be wholly within. So that's a huge, huge thing for us. So it's potentially really, really good. So our next one is going to be Retrieve Octarius Data, which is replacing the Deploy Scramblers, which was one of the best secondaries in the book. Now, it's, for all intents and purposes, very similar in style, except this time, each turn you can pick a quarter and perform the action, and at the end of the turn you basically get credit for it. So within 4 turns, you can potentially get 4 actions completed and score 12 victory points. If you only do it in 3 turns, you get 8 victory points, or 2 points if you only are able to get 2. Now, you don't have to have any interaction with your opponent. All you have to do is be within 6 inches away from another table quarter, so you have to be inside the table quarter a little bit more than you were previously. And you just perform the action and you're good to go. So this is very easy to get. It is a little bit more points that you could potentially get, which is nice. 10 points is a big hit from 15. You're going to be costing yourself 15 previously, or I'm sorry, the 5 points previously with the Scramblers. But it was a near guaranteed. Now you get a little bit more points, getting potentially up to 12. But the downside is you have to do it in each of the first 4 turns or over a 5-turn game. And if you don't play fast, you're not going to get it completed. So that's going to be the key. You need to be able to complete a battle within 2.5 hours, get through the 5 turns, or at least 4 turns to be able to complete this and get your points. A lot of players are not able to do that, and especially in a tournament setting with chess clocks and that stuff, it's going to be really difficult to knock that out unless you're really practiced in your army and you're making sure that your opponent is also not eating into your time as well. So that's going to be really important. So if you take that and you see that you're having some concerns with some playtime, where you can lose some secondaries on that, definitely ask for a chess clock. But this is actually a very easy one to do if that's not an issue, and you get some 12 points. So it's a buff overall.
Yeah, I agree. When I first read this, I was like, they kind of nerfed it, but also buffed it at the same time, if that's even possible. Obviously, if you just do it 3 times, yeah, you only get 8 instead of 10, which isn't quite as good. It's also now table quarters, which actually I think is easier to do than my deployment zone, somewhere 6 inches more than the either deployment zone and then their deployment zone. Table quarters definitely easier to achieve there. Bob pretty much covered it. It's very easy for us to achieve this one. We have a lot of great units that are able to take care of this. I've already been thinking about, cheap units that we can use to score this. Things like Cenobite Servitors, Suppressors, Company Veterans. These are all units that can easily achieve this action for you. The action's done only in your turn, so your opponent won't have a chance to interrupt you, which is great. Cenobite Servitors, we talked about this in our tier list video. S tier unit, because 18 points, you can put these guys in strategic reserves for 1 CP, and they can come on and hit one of those table quarters for you. They're a very small, compact unit, easy to fit in just about anywhere you need them to make sure that you get this secondary. Same thing with company vets. You could take a pair of company vets and Cenobites, 1 CP for both of them in reserves. There's two of your table quarters right there. You should be able to easily do this on your first turn with one of your units in your deployment zone, and then something like infiltrators, or another one of your units that may not be doing too much later on, can score that fourth table quarter for you. So a lot of options for us to score this very easily with very cheap units that isn't going to pull away from our main battle force. Either shoot with this unit or score a secondary. We have a lot of options to do that without having to make those difficult decisions. So that brings us to teleport homers, which was previously teleport homer. Now it is deploy teleport homers. This one was also all or nothing. Previously, you got 4 points for completing the action. You had to be wholly within your opponent's deployment zone. Now it is another one of these where they're giving partial credit for being close, kind of thing. You still get 4 points if you're wholly within your opponent's deployment zone, but now you can also do the action within 12 inches of your opponent's deployment zone and get 2 points. So definitely an improvement there because you can score something. It's in the same category as raise the banners, investigate signal, and retrieve Octarius data. We're just not going to take this over any of those. All 3 of those secondaries are significantly better than this one. Even with this increase, it's nice that they did something for it, but this is just not a secondary that is going to be worth taking, in my opinion.
Yeah, they did buff it quite a bit, with most deployment zones being with this additional 12 inches. It's about mid board on most deployment maps. So you can get some points if you're concerned about not being able to score maximum points against an opponent, but you really shouldn't be shooting for partial credit on each thing. It is nice that they kept the biker units on that, being a little bit more durable and being able to get across the board. But I like Alex said, there's we affectionately call it the rod secondary of retrieve Octaris data. So there's other better ones than this one that'll give you some more points than just partial credit. All right. So that brings us to the next category, Virgin. So the first thing, real quick, on there is going to be cutting off the head has been removed, so that's no longer there. So the next one is assassination is replacing assassinate. So there really isn't a whole lot of difference on this one, other than you get an additional extra victory point for destroying a character that is also your warlord. Other than that, there isn't a whole lot of changes to this one. It's not very good. We're going to be going for trying to kill our opponent, but we also are mainly focused on the objectives. So killing an opponent is not really what we were really trying to do uh, in a game. Obviously, you want to kill your opponent. Going after characters specifically causes your battle plan to be a little bit awry from getting those primary objectives. And a lot of times, your opponents, if since you have to announce this, is probably going to hide that warlord in a group of units so that you can't target them. Unless you're taking snipers, is really not going to be a good one for you to pick on this. Really hard to max this out. There's a lot better options for you.
Yeah, this is going to be the same as what we talked about Assassinate in our previous video, which is it's basically a niche take. If your opponent is running like 4 or 5 characters, this is worth a look, depending on what the rest of your secondaries look like, what the mission is, and that sort of thing. It's worth considering. Basically, they just gave us a little bonus. You get that extra victory point for killing the warlord. Nobody was going to take cut off the head anyway because it was garbage. In those niche circumstances where you might find, hey, my opponent is running a whole bunch of characters for some odd reason, this might be worth considering. You want to make sure that you're going to be able to have the potential to easily score 10 VP with this. The little bump from the warlord helps a little bit. So moving on, bring it down is going to be exactly the same as it was previously. It's the fact version of it. And then that brings us to Titan Hunter, which was significantly nerfed. So previously, if you killed one Titanic vehicle, you got 10 victory points, and then 12 for 2 and 15 for 3 or more. Now you get 4 if you kill 1, 9 if you kill 2, or 15 if you kill 3 or more. So this is a huge nerf for this. The only time we were going to take this anyway was against probably pure knights. Now it's not even worth taking against pure knights. I would not bother with this at all. Those big knights are going to be much harder to bring down multiples of them, and your opponent may not even be running more than 2. And you'd have to kill both to make this even close to worth it. It's just going to be too difficult to achieve for not enough return on your investment.
Yeah, realistically, with the previous rendition of it, we were going to be hard pressed to take down 2 Titans as it was. Now you're going to have to take down pretty much everyone that they have, because most of the time you can only fit 3, maybe 4 into a list, and that's going to be really tough. Pushing all of our anti-tank weaponry to the maximum with great rolling, and it's not really feasible for us. It rewards being able to kill multiples quite well, but we're not going to be teching for Titan Hunters in a tournament setting, a competitive setting. It's still not going to be something that you're going to probably be taking yourself on the secondaries. All right. So the last section that we're going to be doing is going to be Warpcraft. So the Abhor the Witch is unchanged after the January 2020 errata. So those ones are going to be the same. So 3 victory points for each Zerker character, 2 for each Zerker unit.
So that about wraps it up. As Bob said, Abhor the Witch is exactly the same, so there's no change there. We don't care about the other 3 because we don't take psychers. I guess theoretically you could take an Inquisitor who is a psyker and you could do these things, but we'll all call you heretics for that. So one thing I do want to mention, though, that is a change. It is significant, but it's also not significant, and I'll explain that. So the change is now in super heavy auxiliary detachments. If your unit that you're taking there shares a keyword faction that is not one of the big ones, Chaos Imperium, Eldari, Ynnari, or Tyranids, with it. So basically, it has to be like Adeptus Astartes or Black Templars, something like that. If it shares a keyword with your warlord, then you get +2 command points back. So instead of it costing 3 command points to field a super heavy, it's only going to cost you 1 command point to field something like a Spartan. Now, I said it's a big change because that's big. Not having to pay 3 CP, only having to pay 1. Really nice. However, that being said, there really aren't any super heavies that are worth taking. So that's sort of why it's not relevant. Right now, they're just not really worth their points. They are really super expensive, and they just do not do enough damage and are not durable enough to warrant those huge points cost investments that you have to do. But in a casual game, if you want to bring that beloved Spartan that you painted up because it's a really cool model, you only now have to pay 1 CP to do it. So that about wraps it up for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button and make sure you click the bell icon to get notified on all of our latest content. We have a Patreon and we greatly appreciate their support. So if you'd like to get some exclusive content or you'd just like to support the channel, we really appreciate it. Also, be sure to check out our Discord. We have an active community of players on there where you can get lots of help or discussion on all things Black Templars. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.